Thank you, Sam. That was indeed a memorable evening, and Sam can describe it as beautiful and God-honoring. I would say it was terrifying, because there we were, 5,000 people, all of the participants, 4,200 from 198 countries, all of the staff, the media, the volunteers, about 1,500 of them. We were all together. I had just a very small part in the closing ceremonies as the chairman of the Congress. Henry Orombi, who's this tall and was dressed in his regal vestments, looked like an African king. He actually participated for about 5 minutes in kind of a weak voice, and then he handed his script to me. He said, "Take it." I looked at him and said, "My voice is gone." And I thought, I'm a Presbyterian. I've never done an Anglican liturgy in all my life, and this is a 2-hour liturgy. There's no time for practice. There's no time for auditions. We're going live. And indeed, the Lord helped me, and I would say that that's further evidence of the providence of God. The hallmark, the motto, the vision of the Lausanne movement is calling the whole church to take the whole gospel to the whole world. Last evening it was thrilling to be here and to hear our friends Don Gilchrist and Rick Perrin and Luther Whitlock and Sam Logan and others talk about the history of the World Reformed Fellowship and how it was that this movement, a global fellowship, came together. It's fitting that after talking last night about the history of our fellowship, that we would talk this morning about God's broader work beyond our tribe, beyond our family, and for us to think about our interaction with other movements. I'm very pleased to be here this week with friends, with brothers who provide leadership for these organizations that are endorsed by the World Reformed Fellowship. And just as Sam said, the WRF wants to endorse, wants to bless, wants to sanction, wants to encourage the other movements. And I would say likewise that these other movements want to endorse the World Reformed Fellowship. This is my point. We need one another. We're a part of the body of Jesus Christ. Chris Wright is here with the Langham Partnership. The very first thing that I did when I became the chairman of the Lausanne movement in 2004 was to ask Chris Wright if he would serve as the chair of the Theology Working Group. Now, in the 90s, it was my observation that the World Mission Enterprise had become obsessed with quantifiable results. We had become overly pragmatic. Missions had been reduced to a checklist, and theology had been sidelined. In the Lausanne movement, we believe that all theological reflection must lead to mission action, and all mission action must be theologically based. The two are inseparable. And we needed a person like Chris Wright with his global experience to provide leadership for the Theology Working Group. As I began to travel around the world on behalf of Lausanne, I quickly discovered that there were two networks that I was running into everywhere. The first was International Fellowship of Evangelical Students. And I thought it's amazing the way the student movements have trained people who've become pastors and missionaries and scholars and business people and politicians and educators and lawyers and architects. They're in every sphere of society. But I also discovered around the world that there was the Langham Partnership developing leadership at the highest level. Our scholars, our thinkers who are helping us deal with the matters of theology in the 21st century and how it engages with culture, there was the Langham Partnership. And I thank God for Chris and for the way that he has developed this and the way it's experienced tremendous growth under his leadership. And I'm so pleased also that his colleague Ben Holman is here as well and will be participating in the session this afternoon. The second thing that I did in Pattaya in 2004 was to call the General Secretary of the World Evangelical Fellowship. Now, there had been some tensions between the Lausanne movement and the World Evangelical Fellowship, the World Evangelical Alliance over the years. And I called this person. It was Gary Edmonds at the time. And I said, "Gary, I've just been installed as the new chairman of the Lausanne movement. I would like to get together with you as soon as possible to build a friendship that has integrity and to build a partnership between Lausanne and WEA that is exemplary in every sense of the word." He stepped down shortly thereafter, and I had the opportunity to become friends with Jeff Tunnicliffe and worked with him for his tenure at WEA and my tenure at the Lausanne movement largely overlapped. And I'm so pleased that one of the first people that I met last evening when I arrived in the hotel was Dr. Ligon Duncan. a great pastor who has given leadership to one of the great Reformed Presbyterian churches in our country, and is giving leadership now to the establishment of the Gospel Coalition, which is, as the name suggests, a coalition of ministries, most of them Reformed in nature, who are trying to augment the centrality of the gospel in the life of the church and in the life of our culture. That movement has experienced spectacular growth over the course of the last decade. And then David Baer. David, are you here? Not yet, but Overseas Council will be represented this afternoon as well. And likewise, Overseas Council has been used of God to strengthen seminaries around the world. Most anywhere you go, if you look at a library or a classroom building or administrative offices, you'll see that Overseas Council had some role in helping to develop the capacity of those seminary institutions. And so these indeed, Sam, are great organizations that you have selected, and it's my pleasure as a fellow Reformed person, as the former chairman of the Lausanne movement, to endorse these ministries. It was 35 years ago, on Saturday morning, January 12th, 1980, that my wife and I arrived in Tokyo, Japan for the first time. I grew up in the Midwest of the United States in a town called Peoria, Illinois. Maybe you've never heard of Peoria, Illinois, but you've probably heard of Caterpillar Tractors, and the headquarters for that great company is in my hometown. We arrived in Tokyo on a Saturday morning. This was my first time to be outside of the United States. And my wife and I got on a plane in Chicago and flew all the way to Tokyo through the night and arrived there. Actually, it's not quite true. I had been out of the United States once before, now that I think of it. I had been to the Canadian side of Niagara Falls when I was in high school. But that was the extent of my international travel. Our mission leader, Ken Wendling, picked us up at the old Haneda Airport. We drove across Tokyo 2 hours to the community that would become our home. We actually had breakfast that morning with Ken and Jan Wendling, and my wife, who was 6 months pregnant at the time, was resting after the long flight. And then I went out with their son to do some shopping and to go to the bank. And we got on bicycles and rode down narrow little paths and crowded neighborhoods and then cabbage patches here and there, and experiencing shopkeepers and store owners and Japanese people like I'd never seen before. I remember going back to the house after I'd been out on the errands with my friend, the son of our mission leader. And I said to Jeannie, Jeannie, get up. We've got to get out there. It's a whole new world out there. And it was such a sense of excitement. If you've ever done any snorkeling or deep sea diving, you discover there's a whole new world under the sea. And for those of us who are in ministry, particularly for those of us who are in Reformed work, to get out there among the Pentecostals and the Baptists and the Methodists and the Anabaptists, it's a whole new world. Have any of you ever attended the World Pentecostal Fellowship meetings? Anybody here? Oh, you get a lot more for your money when you go to the World Pentecostal Fellowship, let me tell you. I would encourage you, if you don't worship with Pentecostals, that's a life-enriching experience. And probably we're opposite ends of the spectrum. We Reformed Presbyterians, very dignified, highly educated, everything decently in good order. Oh, not with the World Pentecostal Fellowship. There's the Holy Spirit, His immediate presence, unpredictability, chaos, excitement, things that are unknown, but a sense that God is alive and active in this world by His Spirit. I found it tremendously enriching. I remember on an early trip to Mongolia, when the church was just beginning in the early 90s. I was there in 1994. And there was a woman at one of the training sessions, and she said, would you please pray for me? And I was honored to pray for this elderly woman. And I put my hand on her head because there was pain in her brain. I wasn't quite sure the nature of her illness, and I prayed for her the best that I knew how to pray. And when I got done, she looked at me and she said, I want to be healed now. Fortunately, I had some Assembly of God friends with us. I said, hey, Jim, can you come and pray for this woman? And he laid his hands on her, prayed for her. And we got done praying. She wept and hugged him and said, I feel better. Now, I believe that something happened there. There's a gift and experience that I don't have in healing. I believe that God can heal, but to sense how God could use me primarily in the teaching role and my friend Jim to be an agent of the healing work of the Holy Spirit, I believe in those things. And for us to be a part of God's work in the bigger world, oh, there's a great big world out there, and we need to be a part of it. It's broadening, it's deepening, it's rich and enriching. We give and we receive. As we were preparing for the Cape Town Congress in 2010, we often referred to it as a global gift exchange. As I would be meeting with Christian leaders in countries around the world, I would often ask them, what gifts do you have to give? What are some of the characteristics of the church in Zimbabwe? How is God working in your church, in your country? Where are you seeing breakthroughs in Zimbabwe or through missionaries from Zimbabwe and other parts of Africa? And then what are some of the challenges that you're facing where you need help from other parts of the world? I remember being in Kobe, Japan, and I was meeting with a group of older pastors. My wife and I served as missionaries in Japan for 20 years. I was meeting with 5 or 6 older pastors in Kobe, and I said, what gifts do you have to share with the global church? I can remember one of the old pastors, tears began to come down his eyes. He thought, do we have anything to share? The church in Korea is growing dynamically. The church in China is exploding. Here we are in Japan. The church remains less than 1% after 100 years of giving our very best effort. Then another man said, I think we have the gift to share of what it means to be a faithful, persevering church as a tiny minority in a land of indifference. That's a gift to share. I remember being at my first Lausanne gathering in 1987. This was in Singapore. It was convened for about 300 younger leaders from around the world to bring a new generation of men and women into the Lausanne movement. Leighton Ford was there. John Stott was there. Gottfried Ose-Mensah, Vonette Bright, Safir Atial, many wonderful people. And they primarily just hung out in creative ways with those of us who were younger leaders. There was a young man in my small group from Colombo, Sri Lanka, named Kumar Abraham. We became friends. I was attracted to the warmth of his personality, his deep and genuine love for Christ. And maybe the 3rd or 4th day that we were together, we were talking during a break. And I knew that he was a Methodist of the holiness tradition. And he said, Doug, I'm running a leadership training program in the Philippines for mostly younger pastors. He said, do you know any young men from Japan who might want to come down to the Philippines to be a part of our training program? I remember exactly where we were standing on the sidewalk outside one of the university buildings at the University of Singapore. And as he asked me, do I know young people from Japan who might want to go to the Philippines to be a part of the study program, I was smiling, I was being polite, but in the back of my mind I was thinking, why would a Japanese person want to go to the Philippines to study with a Sri Lankan when he could stay in his own country and work with an American? That's the first time that I remember that thought became conscious in my mind. Before we went to Japan, people said, don't take your culture. I thought, I don't understand. How can you take your culture? We're packing everything that we have in 7 barrels. It's mostly books, household items, clothes, things for our child about to be born. How do you take your culture with you? Well, in that encounter with Kumar, I realized I had taken my culture. Because in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I'm an American. You come from a tiny little country that's impoverished by a civil war that will seemingly never end. I come from a rich, powerful country where we recently put the space shuttle into orbit and brought it back safely again. In my mind, I thought, I'm better than you. Well, when that thought became conscious in my mind, I remember going back to my dorm room, the hotel room where I was staying, and kneeling and saying, God, please forgive me. Because I'm meeting with Abraham, not as a Sri Lankan and as an American, but as brothers in Christ. I've followed his life and his ministry until this day. I was just with him, actually, in 2011. And see how God is continuing to use him not only in the Philippines and not only in Sri Lanka, but across Asia. You see, this is the benefit of our being a part of and engaged with intentionally the work of Christ beyond our own tribe, beyond our own borders. And so I could say to him, no, I need you as a Sri Lankan. I need you as South Asians. I need you as East Asians, as those from the South Pacific, as those from Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Europe. We're a part of the same family, and we share the gifts that God has given to us for the benefit of one another and for the glory of God. We're meant to love each other. This is the hallmark of our faith. Put on love, because love covers a multitude of sins. And oftentimes when we see others, what we perceive to be the deficits, the gaps in their theology, we may consider that to be perhaps not sinful, but glaring errors. but there's a sense of in which love is supreme and love finds expression in these relationships. Now, I want to take some time at this point just to express gratitude to the World Reformed Fellowship for the role that you played in the Lausanne movement. And before I express gratitude to those of you in WRF, I want to express gratitude to our translators. Where are the translators? Are they in the back? Oh, they're over here. Okay, thank you. Would you please forgive me? I know I talk way too fast and I jump around a little bit, but I love you and I thank God for you. And those of you who are here who are Brazilian leaders, I think there are about 15 of you who I saw wearing headsets. Could you please stand? Those of you who are Brazilians wearing the headsets, could you just stand for a second? Okay, fortunately the translation is coming through. Good, thank you for your hosting us in your beautiful country. Can we appreciate these brothers and sisters? Thank you. This is my first time in Brazil, and I came a few days early to go down to Curitiba to be with my friend Valdir Stuarnakel, who was a partner in the Lausanne movement. I mentioned earlier that I was a missionary in Japan for 20 years, and being here for 3 days, I thought, why didn't God call me to Brazil? Because I'm an expressive, talkative person, and Brazilians are expressive, talkative people. And I'm a person from the Midwest where we hug people. And for 20 years in Japan, all we did was bow. You didn't touch people. And I think I've hugged 1,000 people since I've been here. I went to church on Sunday morning. I didn't expect to have the life almost squeezed out of me. And so I thank God for that gift that you have, the joy of the church, the dynamism, the energy, not only of your culture, but your church. And so just to be here is a great delight. But there are some people in the World Reformed Fellowship that I want to thank personally and on behalf of the Lausanne movement. Sam Logan, you already made reference to Henry Orambe, who was with us in Edinburgh. He served as the honorary chairman for the Lausanne Congress. He also served as the chair of the Pan-African Host Committee. He made a tremendous contribution. Fergus MacDonald is here. Fergus has really been a mentor both in the Lausanne movement, where he previously served as a chair. He's also been a part of the Bible societies and also a part of the World Reformed Fellowship. John O., the pastor from Sarong Community Church, was also with us in Edinburgh in 2010, and I'm particularly grateful to God for him and for the providence of meeting him. Let me just share with you an experience that I had with John O. I had been to Korea 3 times in 2007, 2008, and 2009, and every time that I was there, John O. was traveling out of the country. Well, in 2010, when we were up in Edinburgh for the World Reformed Fellowship, I saw him one morning there at the assembly. I thought, oh, this is my opportunity to see him. I was looking forward to talking with him about Cape Town. Well, the next morning, I was looking for him, and he was not there. Well, after the conference was over, Jeannie and I went down to London. On a Wednesday night, we had dinner with Chris and Liz Wright in their home, talking about the Theology Working Group, the Cape Town Commitment, the Lausanne Congress. The next morning, Jeannie and I packed our suitcases. We got on the train, and we're on the express train for Heathrow Airport. And there weren't very many people on the train, and somebody across from us said, "Are you going to the airport?" I thought, how did you guess? This is the express train for the airport. We're here with suitcases. What was your clue? And I said, yes, we're going to the airport. And they said, do you think you'll be able to get a flight? I said, I already printed my boarding pass. We're flying to Rome. They said, the airport is closed, you know. I said, what? They said, there's been a volcano in Iceland. I looked out the window of the plane and thought, the sky is perfectly clear. And Iceland is hundreds of miles north and west. And we're going south and east to Rome. But I thought, I'm feeling lucky. Not a good Reformed word, but I thought, you know, I feel like things are going well. And so we went to the airport, and I thought, I'm sure there'll be one plane flying. It will go to Rome, and I'll be in that plane. And everybody else will be gone, and they'll put me in first class with my wife. And the next day was her birthday. We were going to be in Rome. It was also the Pope's birthday. He hadn't responded to the party invitation, but we were looking forward to going to Rome. But when we got to the airport, there were hundreds of British women in blue suits to let everybody know, and we were the only ones who went, say the airport is closed. Well, they put us up in a nice hotel, and they said, we don't know when planes will fly again. And I thought, oh my goodness, it's only 6 months to this global Congress. I've got so much to do, so many things that need to be organized, so much money that needs to be raised. And the next day, everything is grounded. The next day, nothing's flying. And we heard people saying the last time that volcano erupted, it erupted for 6 months. And I thought, I've got a son who's getting married. I've got a daughter who's graduated from college. I called the Queen Elizabeth II to see if I could get a boat back to America. Well, on Sunday, we decided to move to another hotel because the hotel where we had was a very small room, and I needed more room if I was going to be stuck for a while to work. And so on a Sunday afternoon in April in London, where the weather was perfect and millions of people were out traveling on the tube, taking walks, Jeannie and I were pulling our suitcases. We got on the subway. We went to King's Cross, one of the biggest train stations in London, I think. And we came up some steps, looked for a taxi stand. There were lots of taxi stands around there. We got in line, and just as we got to the front of the line, I turned around to make sure my wife was behind me. I said, as soon as the car comes, you've got to jump in and move fast. Well, when I turned around to look, my wife, there behind her was John O. I thought, what's the possibility of a missionary to Japan, living in Boston, meeting a pastor from Seoul, Korea at a taxi stand in London? Well, that evening, he called me and he said, could you have dinner with us tonight? I said, I don't have any plans for the rest of my life. I'm stuck here. And so we met for dinner. And over dinner, we began talking about the Congress. And he said, how can we help? I said, Pastor, I would really love to find a testimony of faith and courage from a North Korean believer. He said, now you're talking. He said, come to Seoul in June and I'll introduce you to some North Korean believers. I went to Seoul, met a beautiful young Korean woman who shared her testimony at Cape Town on Monday night. It was the most powerful moment of the Congress. Then John introduced me to 4 other pastors of large churches in Seoul, Korea. Each one of them gave $100,000. Then when I got back to the States, he introduced me to some Japanese businessmen who gave $2 million. Now, as a result of a volcano in Iceland, after the World Reformed Fellowship in Edinburgh, a Korean and a Japanese missionary met at a taxi stand, and it resulted in the most powerful moment of the Congress and in the most generous gifts for the Congress. Now, I thought, we make our plans, but God determines our steps. And when I met that young girl who's now a student at Biola, 22 years old, speaks beautiful English, I said, do you know that the change in your life happened because of a volcano in Japan? Isn't it amazing how God's providence works in these great ways? And by the way, anytime I get in a taxi stand now, a line, I look around. See, who do I know in this line? So I'm thankful to God for that. And I thank God for the way in which not only Sam and John O. and others contributed in such a great way to the Congress, but I thank God for the friendship of people both during and after. The vision for the Third Lausanne Congress came in the Bodleian Library in Oxford in January of 2004. The confirmation that it was to be held in Cape Town came in February of 2007. In October of 2007, our small team met in Cape Town to begin the planning. There were about 15 of us, and also 30 Africans who were there from across the continent. We had been meeting from Sunday evening with the African Committee all the way through until Friday afternoon. And Friday afternoon, our meetings were to close, and then people would go to the airport and return to their homes around the world. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I realized that there are 5 issues where we're stuck. And when you're planning something like this, there are certain decisions that have to take place before other decisions can be made. And I thought, we're running out of time. I see some conflicts developing, some turf protection developing. And I thought, I don't know what else to do but to get down on our knees and ask God to bless and to guide us. So we got down and we prayed. We were in a circle facing the outside. As a circle, the chairs were in a circle. And I asked Michael Cassidy if he would lead us in the closing prayer. Now, as each person was praying, I could hear their voice going into their chair and bouncing off the wall. But when Michael Cassidy began to pray, I could tell he was not seated. And I looked and I could see him walking around the room, and he was praying over people, and he was praying for blessing. And then he said something very interesting in his prayer. He said, God, we need your wisdom. And I'm asking you to release your wisdom in this room, and I'm asking you to release wisdom in the next 15 minutes. I thought, wow, that's an interesting prayer. And I thought, we've been working for 5 days, from morning till night. And the next 15 minutes is a tea break. And Michael is asking God to get all the work done over a tea break. Seemed kind of a presumptuous prayer. But when we went for tea, I saw people going to get some cookies and tea, and they were talking together and say, hey, Chris, what do you think if we did this? Well, that's a great idea. Why didn't we think of that earlier? A couple of people over here talking and say, what do you think if we did this? Well, that's a wonderful idea. Why didn't we think of that earlier? People over here talking, and when we came back after 15 minutes, all 5 of those problems had been resolved. Because God had released his Spirit in 15 minutes, and we realized that God was working in our midst. This wasn't just a human initiative. God was present by his Spirit. When we realized what God had done, we stood together and we sang the doxology. We never forgot that. Every time we would meet, we would have stones of remembrance. We would pile up stones of what God had done in our midst. I can remember stopping in London on the way back to Boston after those meetings to see John Stott, who was the honorary chairman. Though he didn't want an administrative task, he liked to be kept informed on what was happening. And I said, Uncle John, I've got to tell you, the most amazing thing that happened during the week was this prayer from Michael Cassidy, and he knew Michael well. I said, he asked God to solve the problems. He asked God to release his Spirit in that room in the next 15 minutes. And I said, it seems to me like he put God on a pretty short time horizon. And without hesitation, John Stott said, 15 minutes is plenty of time for God. And so we saw God work in such wonderful ways there. One of the great disappointments of Cape Town was the fact that the Chinese delegation was not able to come. There were 200 people from across China who were going to be with us. They had not been able to be at Wazan 74 because we didn't have any contact with the church in China at that time, virtually none. In 1989, when Thomas Wong was the Congress director, they were hoping for 100 participants. But the Congress was just after the Tiananmen incident in 1989. We didn't have any Chinese. We were thrilled to have people from China with us at this Congress. And many times around the world I said it will be worth it to go to this Congress if for no other reason than to meet these 200 inspiring leaders from China. Well, they were not able to come. It was a huge disappointment to all of us. But 2 interesting things happened as a result. The second day, I went out behind the convention center where there was the media team. This Congress was being broadcast to 647 sites around the world. I discovered that all the systems were down. We had experienced a cyber attack from China. And we couldn't communicate, we couldn't use media at all. We had 40 people working on fixing this problem. 40 people from the South African Broadcasting Company, and then several of our own Luzon people. The first day, 2 young men from Hyderabad, India came and said, could we help you? We said, no, you're here as stewards. You do what you're supposed to do. We have professionals working on the job. The second day, they came back and said, we think we can help you. And one of their friends said, we think you should listen to these young men. And we said, do you have any experience? And they said, yes, we work for Cisco Systems in internet security. Do you have any training? One of these young guys who looked like he was about 18 said, yes, I have a PhD in computational physics. We said, oh, come on in and help us. In 2.5 hours, these 2 young men who'd flown to Cape Town from Hyderabad as volunteers solved a problem that 40 specialists couldn't take care of in 36 hours. And so we saw God at work there as well. My dear friend Sam has given me the opportunity to share something of what it means to be a part of the church around the world. To add my words of affirmation to the ministries that are represented here, I want to tell you that I experienced the joy of being a part of the body of Christ in the greatest way during the thrilling experience of Cape Town. I also want to testify that I experienced the strength of being a part of the body of Christ in the years that followed Cape Town, which for me have been the most difficult years of my life. Health challenges, relational difficulties. I was recruited to the American Bible Society as their new president. I started on the 1st of March in 2013. I was there for 7 months. I loved every day that I was there except for the last. On that day, I was called to a law office where without any pre-discussions, without any opportunity to go over matters, I was fired rather abruptly and unceremoniously and entered into a dark night of the soul. But it was in that time also, amazingly, that in my greatest weakness, in my greatest desperation, my sense of brokenness, a sense of feeling that I'm nobody, everything that I've worked for seemingly is gone, that I was surrounded by brothers and sisters who encouraged me, people from the World Reformed Fellowship, Sam Logan and Ron Skates in particular, people in the Langham Partnership, the Gospel Coalition, World Evangelical Fellowship, Overseas Council, my friends in the Lausanne movement. When I first became the chairman of the Lausanne movement, I went to see Billy Graham, and I asked him, Billy, what did you mean when you used the term the spirit of Lausanne in the first Lausanne Congress? And though his eyes are weak and his hearing is quite bad, he said the spirit of Lausanne, his hands went up, a big smile came across that old mountain face, and he said it's a spirit of humility and friendship and study and prayer and partnership and hope. Begins with humility, ends with hope, includes friendship, study, prayer, partnership. This is what the World Reformed Fellowship is all about. And I trust that God will use us because the church around the world needs what we have by way of our theological heritage, our educational institution, our churches, our commitment to evangelism and church planting, and we need them. May God use us in that same spirit. May we be characterized by a spirit of humility and friendship and study and prayer and partnership and hope. God bless you. Thank you.